G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. I've been pondering the conundrum that seems to be afflicting the Americans. To impeach or not to impeach seems to be the question. But on the other hand, why not just implement the 25th Amendment? At the moment, as I can stumble it, Nancy Pelosi has said unto the Democrats 35 or 38 out of the 238 are in favour of impeaching the president. That's not a majority. And that's in the House the Democrats control. In the other House, the Republicans are in control. And so far, precisely one Republican has said that he's actually read the Mueller report and he considers that it outlines the obstruction of justice which the president indulged in, and therefore he should be impeached. The president's attitude is that to impeach him would require that he gets proven to have committed high crimes and misdemeanors. Well, Mueller says they have a tradition that you can't indict, as in criminally prosecute, a sitting president. So therefore, he didn't try to launch a prosecution. He investigated the idea of whether there was collusion with the Russians and whether there was obstruction of justice into the investigation into the collusion. And he said he didn't find any actual collusion, although the Russians independently meddled in the American political process. They did so for their own reasons, and they didn't apparently feel it was necessary to coordinate overtly with the Trump campaign. If you can believe that, they apparently didn't go into the fact that Donald Trump's wife used to be a member of the Slovenian Komsomolskaya when she was an 18-year-old blonde bombshell and the Berlin Wall fell down and the last gasp of the KGB was to push out a whole bunch of honeypot deep cover sleeper agents with the idea of hooking themselves a rich man's idiot son and seeing how far up the ziggurat of power they could ride the fool. So about the time Tronald Dump married Melania, that's when all of a sudden he got access to Russian oligarchical money to bail him out when nobody else in the world would lend him money because he'd lost money hand over fist as soon as his father started giving him millions of dollars, and he'd set all of his companies and enterprises bankrupt, and he was a bad risk for money. I don't know, like maybe he just runs on pussy power. Who knows? I would have thought that rather than trying to get the two houses of the American government together on the idea of impeaching him for obstruction of justice into whether or not he colluded when the investigation said he didn't collude because the Russians just thought he was such a fucking idiot buffoon that they'd be happy to see him in the Oval Office because then they wouldn't have a coherent, intelligent adversary, opponent, opposition. Pick your word. So yeah, the Russians didn't need to collude with the Republican Trump campaign. They just did what they could to sow confusion and dissent and a lack and alarm and get the American middle classes to vote for Tronald Dump. For the shits and the giggles, perhaps. It appealed to Putin's sense of vengeance for the fall of the Soviet Empire. Difficult to pin it down precisely. But anyway, that seems to be what happened. So impeachment could be a difficult sort of a row to hoe, which is probably why Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to get into it. On the other hand, you've got this 25th Amendment, which basically says that if you've got somebody in the presidency whose mental state has deteriorated to the point where, they've told 10,000 lies, They get up in the morning and they say black's white, and then halfway through lunchtime they change their mind and say it's actually purple with orange spots. I mean, the level of detachment from reality and manic narcissism displayed by this president of the United States, the POTUS, it would be hilariously funny if it wasn't real. You know, like this clown has got the American launch codes for every nuclear warhead in the pentagonal hemorrhoidal asshole's armory. People are graduating from West Point, looking forward to a career in the military, being obedient to whatever whim the clown in the White House happens to want to indulge in. So, yeah, there's this 25th Amendment that says if the person in the White House is mentally unfit, then you can just remove them from office. And of course, if you were to do that, I'm pretty sure Nancy Pelosi would wind up being the next in line, Speaker of the House. So the Republicans aren't going to want to go along with that either, which sort of leaves you with the idea that Donald Trump is going to attempt to cling to power as his public image and credibility goes down the tubes. Now, he didn't expect to win the election. He thought he was going to go on a lucrative public speaking tour explaining how he was robbed. He got stuck with the job. He doesn't like the job. He's no bloody good at the job. If he had half a brain, he would resign and say he's not interested in the job. But that doesn't appear to be his style. So I think he'll try and stay there. And I heard a very interesting discussion with one of Australia's political commentators, a fellow called Waleed Ali, who works for the ABC. And he was talking on his regular program about the 2020 election and impeachment and this whole shitbox and shooting match. And he said that if the Democrats decided to try to impeach Trump, and if they got it up, and if they succeeded in impeaching him, Trump's welded on base of supporters, the people who wear their MAGA hats all over the place, they would not accept the fact that their president had been impeached. They would listen to Trump's calls about treason and coups, and they would pretty well literally grab their Second Amendment rights and run out into the streets and stage an armed insurrection if you impeach Trump. I think the same thing would probably happen if you were to invoke the 25th Amendment. And then Waleed said a really frightening thing. He said from his observations, the feeling in his bones, even if Trump loses the 2020 election, his rusted on base group of supporters probably won't accept that. And what Waleed Trump said, truly a terrifying thought, particularly if you've got friends in the excited states. And, you know, I talked to quite a few people on the YouTube comments threads who live there, you know, and then they're nice people, and some of them, you know, probably voted for Trump. Some of them hate him, but, you know, they're more or less pleasant to chat with. What Waleed Ali said was that if Trump doesn't get elected in 2020 or re-elected, his supporters will go and riot in the streets and stage a civil insurrection, just like they would if he was taken out by the 25th Amendment or if he was impeached. So how much more damage is he going to do if he's in there till 2023? Or will America just collapse under the impact of global warming's ever increasing intensity and ever increasing frequency of record breaking extreme weather events like the 130 tornadoes that waltzed across Missouri in one day and then headed off for Alabama because they were too big to actually die out at night time. They just had a bit of a rest and got bigger the next day. I've been saying for years that global warming will utterly crush all the little Trumpletonians. and probably going to crush all those who voted for the Liberal national government in Australia too. Um, but that's a bit off topic. They're related. You know, the Americans have elected themselves a president who does not accept science, and the Australians have elected themselves a federal government that does not accept science. The Federal Minister for Energy has explained to the Business Council that he's not interested in their desperate cries for him to do something realistic about reducing Australia's carbon emissions in the face of global warming, because he's been elected by muddled Australiana to reduce the price of electricity. The people who are in favour of digging and burning and exporting more coal think that because they have successfully won over the population with propaganda, they think the issue of global warming and carbon emissions has been voted out of existence because they have been returned to power on a platform of fuck the environment. And yeah, I don't think Australia's going to do well out of that program, and I don't think America's going to do well out of that program. But at the moment, a democratic majority of Australians are happy with having voted to die, and a democratic majority of the electorate, what is it, the Electoral Council in America, the Electoral College, they have voted that Donald Trump should be their prissy dunce. And I don't think his base will allow him to be impeached or removed by constitutional invocation of the 25th Amendment. Which kind of means that he's going to continue his tariff war on the rest of the world. So the global village's international trade economy is going to continue to be constrained by the whim of an ignorant buffoon at a time when all of the really intelligent people are desperately attempting to continue to grow their economy, which means increasing their consumption of resources and increasing their consumption of energy and increasing their emission of greenhouse gases. So counterintuitively, Donald Trump is probably going to achieve more for reducing the planet's greenhouse gas emissions than any other combination of human-induced factors I can think of, short of everybody waking up tomorrow morning and decided that they want to live as pacifist vegetarians dedicated to repairing the ecology and rebuilding the biosphere's homeostasis feedback mechanisms by planting more trees and consuming less of everything. And I don't think that's likely. Not many people seem to be interested in that. So the official plan is to grow the economy until the wheels fall off the biosphere. And then, when humanity is reduced to attempting to live a pre-1788 Aboriginal lifestyle, after having completely dismantled the requisite ecology within which to live that lifestyle, we'll see who's left on the other side of the genetic bottleneck to try and perhaps rebuild some kind of a human culture afterwards. Life is such, as my daughter used to say when deliberately bowdlerising Ned Kelly's famous last words. Ah, well, the world may be going to hell in a handbasket, but at least we've got a ringside seat, each individual one of us. Smooth. Life is such, Ned Kelly. Life is such. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.